Well, howdy, Joseph.
Hi, hello, how are you?
We heard the news,
We're quite enthused.
and the only thing to do
What should we do?
is strum this guitar
And sing to the stars.
and serenade you.
Ooh.
You survived, and that's true. I thought I said a little wish to you.
That is a mighty fine feeling. But hey, let's pick it up.
All right.
That's more like it. Yeehaw!
Play it for Joseph.
All right, now where were we? Okay, you're still standing, and that's pretty great.
Joseph!
You know what? You kicked its butt. It's time to celebrate.
Joseph!
Wurzel jingle jangle.
It's time to do-si-do.
So grab yourself a partner and let's see go.
Cause it's a
Jingle jangle here and a jingle jangle there. A jingle jangle inspiration everywhere. A jingle jangle here and a jingle jangle there.
a jingle jangle inspiration everywhere.
All right. Woo, yeah.
That's how you celebrate.
I'm William Shatner. I've done a lot of things in my career, but this takes the cake. This is so cool. You, Joseph, today, it's all about you. You won the internet. Congratulations. It's exciting. It makes me want to celebrate. Makes me want to get up out of this chair. Makes me want to sing. Makes me want to dance. Makes me want to shout. Kick my heels up. Throw my hands up. Toss my head back. No, really, people should be shouting your name in the street.
Come on now, sing that name.
Sing that song.
Joseph, sing.
Sing it out loud.
Joseph.
I want to celebrate. Put it up in lights.
The internet belongs to you.
See, no one else deserves to be celebrated like you because you are the best.
Am I being overconfident? Am I becoming complacent about complacency?
I think you are.
Oh, he's not the Messiah, he's just a very naughty boy.
Yeah, I've got big ears.
Brian just wanted to see anyone else. Piss off!
That's the one, because you literally complete me, and we complete each other.
You've obviously encountered discrimination in your own life by virtue of being Australian. So
Hey, Manuel Kemp was a real pissant who was very rarely stable.
I don't want to get too gushy, but I might just be saying you complete me, D. PNG now stands for Pritchard and Good.
Branding is not a bad blind date. Look at you! You are insane!
How did I do that?
You're
How
insane!
did I do that?
You're insane!
Well, I have to tell you, I am super excited. I'm not as excited to see earlier versions of me with less white and gray and a little bit svelter. Can that be said? Svelter, is that such a thing? Less, more svelte, less non-svelte. But it was a good reminder to look at one of the older introductions to the show that talks about surviving. Initially, perhaps we were talking about 2020, but then for me, open heart surgery in 2021, I just came back from a mindfulness retreat. And I was reminded by a couple of the facilitators that I've been through the ringer. And you know what? You've been through the ringer too. We've all been through the ringer over the last 3+ years, and maybe in the 3 before that, or even the 30 before that. Sometimes it is good to be celebrated like I just was by my good friend, William Shatner. Good friend in air quotes. If this is audio, imagine that I'm holding my hands up right now and giving you air quotes. But sometimes it's good to take a break and pat yourself on the back, or be patted on the back, or use Cameo to get patted yourself, to get patted on the back yourself. It's all good. We do need to remind ourselves that we're doing our best, and life, I guess, is an active project, but also a work in progress. But today we're going to speak to what I would like to believe is perfection personified. Seth Matlins, who is, Have you heard of the legacy that is Forbes, the legend and legacy of Forbes? This is the marketing genius behind it. Well, I'll let him decide to refute, or boost that image. But he's doing some amazing things for Forbes right now, specifically amongst my favorite community in the world, which is the chief marketing community, the marketing world. Can marketing be saved? Or as I often like to say, can marketing save the corporation? Can marketing save capitalism? We will discuss shortly. Now, if you like me, if you love me, hey, even if you hate me, please subscribe to me. I think that's a thing. bit.ly/subscribe to the show, my YouTube channel. The only thing I don't want is apathy or indifference. If you have no opinion of me, well, then I don't want you to do anything because you wouldn't have done anything anyway. So love or hate, I'm your guy. Anything in between, go find somebody else to love or hate, because if we don't feel, if we are not with feeling, if there is no emotion pouring through our veins, then we are alive and yet we are dead at the same time. But back to the world of the living. Every morning for the last year, I have been fortunate enough to lead a virtual coffee and audio first virtual coffee Monday through Friday, 8 to 9 a.m. Eastern Standard Time. I believe this is going to take over the corporate world. Every single company will start their day off with some kind of a virtual audio first experience, whether it involves manifestation, meditation, open mics, live book reads, guests coming in, Wellness Wednesdays. Hey, we do all of that already, and we've been doing it every single day in our Discord server and also on Clubhouse. And I invite you to join us. Some of the recent discussions we've had was about the rebranding of Twitter to X by Elon Musk. And I took a slightly different position, talking about the genius of Musk as opposed to the idiocy of being able to shutter a brand that apparently means a lot to a lot of people who don't actually spend a dime to support that brand. But it was an interesting discussion. We also discussed the drama triangle, the whole idea between the rescuer or the hero, the persecutor or the villain, and then finally the victim, and how to move into a transformational triangle. And finally, recently we discussed why wouldn't we discuss Barbenheimer, the interesting mashup, whether it was forced or unforced, whether it was natural or not, organic or not, but this interesting, shall we say, a coalition between unusual or unwilling bedfellows, Barbie and Oppenheimer, to create maybe a blip, maybe an exception, or maybe a norm in terms of box office receipts. I seem to think it will be more an exception than the norm. Now, finally, if you are not of the 8 to 9 a.m. persuasion, maybe you've got something better going on, or maybe you're just sleeping on the West Coast or doing something else around the world, you can subscribe to a podcast version, and that is available via bit.ly/collective cafe to go. But now it is time, speaking of going, to go to a place that is really near and dear to my heart. It is the world of capitalism, and specifically the evolution of capitalism. Now, in this soliloquy, I want to just be clear. This is maybe one of my favorite topics right now, and I do not want you to eat any human beings. I do not want you to eat the rich or eat the poor, because we need those rich. I know you may not think so, especially if you are rich yourself. But I've been particularly focused on what I believe comes next, because evolution, you see this thing about evolution, about the survival of the fittest, about adaptation, about how we move our survival instinct to actually move with the times. As Mr. Darwin once said, it is not the strongest of species that survives, nor the most intelligent, but rather the one that is the most adaptable to change. And change capitalism must. Change capitalism needs to. This does not mean the dilution of, it does not mean the degradation of, it does not mean some kind of retardation or moving backwards or regression. In fact, what it means is that there is a way to be able to involve, include, and reward a much larger version of active participants, stakeholders, shareholders, whatever the case may be, from employees to customers to community, without actually sacrificing that good old bottom line. This may be one of those quintessential times where we take one step backwards in order to move 2 steps forward, or maybe even a giant leap forward. We're seeing it across the board. We're seeing people from Philip Kotler to Ray Dalio. We're just seeing so many people, John Mackey, even the great Seth Matlins is jumping on the bandwagon or brandwagon. And I think we're going to see much more of it. So watch this space. I'm going to be dedicating a lot more of my time to the subject because it is so sorely and so greatly needed. But now what we need and who we need is Seth Matlins. Now, normally this would be one of the times when I read his bio, but I did warn him that there would be some surprises. And so one of the surprises, we typically ask our guests for some fun facts, or we send our private investigators into the field in order to uncover some dirt. And what we actually found out about Seth is that he has been behind the scenes. In fact, he was behind the Coke American Idol deal that was considered to have changed TV advertising. And so I think what I'm going to do is, this could go very pear-shaped, but I am going to bring him on, and then immediately I'm going to mute him. So Seth, you're about to be muted because in fact, you know what? I will unmute you. You can feel free to let's do this, in fact, so we can see some of.
As long as you don't ask me to sing.
No, I'm not going to sing, but I'm going to introduce you as Simon Cowell, thanks to ChatGPT. It's one of the accents that I'm not sure I can do too well, but I can do some British accent. So let's try it. Well, let me introduce you to Seth Matlins, the award-winning marketer, or so he claims. He's been around rubbing elbows with the C-suite of those so-called biggest global brands, as if we're supposed to be impressed. Currently, he's the managing director of the Forbes CMO network, acting like he's some kind of marketing genius. The only genius is the person you're looking at right now. Before that, he was just another EVP of cultural strategy and insights at some Hollywood agency called Endeavors 160 by 90 or something like that. Wow, cultural strategy and insight sounds like a real snooze fest to me. And let's not forget, he was on Endeavor's DEI board of advisors, like he's some kind of diversity hero. Oh, and here comes the founder of That Was Then Enterprises, a brand strategy and development consultancy. Seriously, who comes up with these fancy titles? I bet he just likes to hear himself talk, kind of like someone else I know. He even had the audacity to introduce federal legislation, the Truth in Advertising Act, like anyone cares about that. Then he had a little stint as the global CMO of Live Nation, thinking he's some kind of marketing god, whoop-de-doo. Before that, he was just trying to make a name for himself at CAA, president of Rock the Vote. Sounds like he's trying to be some political hotshot. And now he's sitting on the boards of the Ad Council, American Advertising Federation, and the Marketing Advisory Board of Global Citizen, acting all important and influential. I'm not buying it. Frankly, I've seen more impressive marketers in my sleep. Seth Matlins, what a load of hype. Next. I mean, what does Simon Cowell know?
I mean, I can't decide if I've ever been backhanded and forehanded the way you have. It was extraordinary flattery and then, probably the appropriate deflation.
Some people pay extra money to get backhanded and forehanded, but that's another show on another day and another network. Welcome to the show, Seth. That is an impressive bio.
Yeah, well, it's, been doing it for as long as I have. You're bound to have a few successes.
Well, a few incredible successes. And obviously, introducing legislation. I mean, we'll talk about some of them, but right now we need to get back to the subject at hand, which is the fun facts. Because if you thought we were finished with you, you were wrong. And this one was
hope.
This one is so awesome that I couldn't even create some kind of a terribly, terribly bad Photoshop. How the hell did you come to become the author of the Scratch and Sniff book of weed, now in its seventh printing.
You want the actual story?
Which one is more bizarre?
Well,
Truth or fiction?
so the actual story is a friend of mine at the time this goes back to, I think, 2014. She was a photographer, and she showed me kind of a close-up picture, a beautiful, beautiful, detailed picture that one of her students actually had taken of a cannabis flower, of a bud. And my immediate thought as I looked at that was, well, my immediate memory was who I was in college, where I majored in horticulture of a certain type. And I was like, that picture could be a poster on a lot of college walls. And that was the original idea for the book, which was, hey, let's go create, kind of a scratch and sniff guide to the strains in the plant. What we found out very quickly was that was going to be an expensive and long proposition to create scratch and sniff scents that are tailored. Who needed that? So I adapted the context of the book to the scents, scratch and sniff scents, straight out of what you used when scratched and sniffed when you were a kid, to what was already available. And we modified the content, and it's 22 pages of factoids that is incredibly well reviewed on Amazon, I'm pleased to say. And I'm pleased to say just 2 weeks ago we received yet another royalty check 6 years after its initial publication on 4/20/2017.
Well, it had to have been published on 4/20. And like that little beautiful purple sticker says, this book is dope. My question to you is, do you get more money from royalties from the Scratch and Sniff Book of Weed or by tweeting via Elon Musk? That is the question of 2023.
It's about equal. And I should also report that I deleted Twitter Sunday, or that formerly known as Twitter. So not only did I never receive money from them, because my following was about 12 people, but I shall never. And I feel really excellent about it.
Now, I'm going to ask you why in a moment, because unlike so many people that I talk to, I do care what you have to say. I want to know your motivations, and I did notice. I presume, due to my not susical but sleuthical powers of deduction, because what you sent me was follow Seth on the threads as opposed to on the, I don't know, whatever it's called, the X's or the X's. Yeah. So tell me, why seriously did you choose to walk away from Twitter?
Because of Elon.
Maybe I should have said what part of Elon.
Well, the final straw was when I woke up Sunday morning and saw that the X branding had replaced the bird on my app. And quite simply, I didn't want to think about Elon every time I opened up the app. I think while he's a genius, I don't care for him. I don't want to think about him. I have a Tesla that I will be getting rid of for the same reasons. And in fact, I told a story the other day of, it's 2012, give or take, and I was working one afternoon at Soho House in West Hollywood, and I left. And as I was leaving, I wound up alone in the elevator with Elon and Amber Heard, and we went down quietly. And when we got to the valet, it was just the three of us yet again. And just before his Tesla pulled up, I did turn to him and I asked him, I said, when you get into your car, do you think to yourself, I made this? Because I never have that experience. And he did say that, in fact, he did think that. And the problem for me with that formerly known as Twitter is I too think that he made it or unmade it, is in the process of unmaking it. And I was uninterested in thinking that, which to me is a lesson about the fact that today's marketing landscape is, as it is in fact always been, despite all the changes, just a series of ingredients that ladder up to what our perception of a brand and business are. And if the negatives rise to the top, we cease to be customers.
I have two takes on that. Well, one directly on what you said, and then one in terms of how I interpreted it. Um, First of all, and I don't mean this in a gratuitous sense, but there are a lot of people that talk a big game in terms of, oh, I'm deleting Twitter, and some have. Um, Very few are gonna go the whole way. Not only delete Twitter, but literally give up their Tesla because of a fundamental and a philosophical disagreement. And so I applaud anyone that has that level of conviction. I took a slightly different take, and I took a take basically by taking a step back and saying, actually, the Twitter brand had been flailing and been struggling. And the only thing that really brought that brand back to some kind of life was the previous, or in his mind, still the current president of the United States. And so, in a previous book of mine, I'd said Twitter, the only company that should acquire Twitter is the United Nations, because I just didn't see it as a marketing platform or as a means to infiltrate people's attention with ads and promoted tweets. I just never bought into the advertising or the brand business model. But in terms of speed to market and in terms of what I felt was a public service, Twitter was mission critical. And so anything that has happened beyond, including but not limited to some of the antics from Mr. Musk, I haven't approved of and never will.
Look, I mean, Twitter's history shows by and large that you're right. I mean, not many people have bought into it as an ad platform, or at least not enough to make it a profitable business. If we pare it down to what it was at its best, for me anyway, I learned so. I was more of a lurker on Twitter and less of a conversationalist over time. I liked a lot. I didn't tweet a lot over the, I think, 9 years that I was on the platform. But I learned so much from so many people, and it was the network effects that kept me there. And it's the network effects that I hope Thread comes to embody at some point. And it's up to us, those of us who, and I don't, by the way, think that getting rid of a car or deleting an app is much of a testimony to my conscious consumption. But I thought was at its core, at its simplest, it was a great product, a great service. I don't understand why it couldn't be monetized the way Insta has been, the way Threads may be, the way Facebook has been, the way any digital media has been, because it did have people's attention, and in fact, a very specific people, depending upon how you segment. So I think it's a loss to many, but I hope we turn Threads or something else, Spill for some, Blue Sky for others, into something that replaces it, because nothing to replace it for me at the moment. So I keep my fingers crossed.
There are a couple of other interesting little threads that have unraveled from that, and pun maybe intended and not intended, maybe not intended, because I kind of jotted this down, which is this idea of lurking and learning. There's something really powerful about actually keeping your big mouth shut. And I'm not referring specifically to yours, but maybe some of the marketers or some of the business people, including and maybe led by Elon, that people always feel the need to talk. People feel the need to have to give us their 2 cents, whether we asked for it or not, especially based on seniority or based on what they believe is the position or the opportunity that they've earned. And that isn't true. And it's, when we even look at Clubhouse, I think one of the failings of Clubhouse, that everyone feels the need to tell you what they think, even if you haven't asked for it. And I wonder what your thoughts are, just going back to this idea of the power of lurking, and how lurking as a means to learn, why we need more of that in society, especially in this world of innovation, this world of business and marketing.
I couldn't agree with you more. And I think, lurk may have a slightly negative context, but if it's listen and learn, I couldn't agree more. And in fact, I'll make it, bring it back to what I do at Forbes. Amongst the things that I do at Forbes is convene groups of chief marketing officers and marketing senior most leaders. And I often get kind of a note from a CMO who will invite to our 19th annual Forbes CMO Summit, for example. Oh, and by the way, going back to your, I'd be remiss, I've had nothing to do with Forbes' success. I've had a little to do with the CMO network success. They've been fine without me, and have built an extraordinary and resilient.
The record will reflect.
The record will reflect. And they say to me, I don't know if I can come to the summit if I don't speak. My boss wants to know I'm speaking. I'm like, I don't know. If I was your boss, I'd want to know you were listening, because your boss already knows what you think, presumably, your boss being you're the CEO typically.
I'm giving that one. That one is a fantastic. That is an air horn worthy soundbite. I love it.
Yeah, just it's not that we don't get smarter or more refined in talking, right? That's a lot of us think out loud, but listening is where real growth comes from, or conversing anyway, rather than the monologues I think so many of these marketing confabs are rife with.
I mean, I'm so glad I asked the question, and that answer is just gold, Jerry. Now, I'm actually going to let you off the hook, and we won't embarrass you anymore.
Yes,
for example, finding out that you represented 3 of the first 4 men's Olympic gold medalists in beach volleyball. I'm assuming we're talking on the court. Is that the right, or on the sand? Is that the right?
They were on the sand. I represented them off court, as it were, and we're talking about the 96 games, I think, were the first to have Olympic beach volleyball, and then 2000, I suppose it would have been, but it was Karch Karai, Kent Steffes, and the second round was second set of games was Eric Fenoy Moana. I can't remember who Fenoy's partner was, but yeah, when I left my first job, which was at Avion, certain that I didn't want to be a CMO anywhere. Funny how life works out. I joined an agency that they'd been an agency of mine when I was on the client side, called ProServe. They no longer exist, but they were kind of the number 2 sports marketing and management company to IMG. There was a bit of IMG was much larger and had been founded around Stan Smith and Arthur Ashe, the way IMG had been founded around Arnold Palmer. And yeah, my first job there before going to start the marketing consultancy was actually as a VP of Olympic sports, where I represented 3 of the first 4 gold medalists in Olympic beach volleyball, a small and quiet claim to fame.
Yeah, I'm still going with the fact that you were on the court. I
was not on the court. No,
this is definitely
image, which is, I suppose, proof positive.
Yeah, this is definitely the show where you can come to get your ego boosted and get sued. Which is why I pride myself on really bad Photoshop. Speaking of which, let's go back to Coke for a second. Yeah. You and I have something in common.
I saw the Coke bottles behind you.
Well, you saw some Coke bottles behind you, and I began my career working for Nandos Chickenland in South Africa. And what put Nandos actually on the map was their very famous Coke promotion: buy a full pack and get a 2 liter of Coke. And I was the 3rd marketing employee in the company's history. And one of my, I mean, I just literally made up my own portfolio. But one of the things I used to do is once a year is actually deliver the stats and the analytics behind the promotion. And so it's very near and dear to my heart, not only the power of promotion and the power of partnership, but actually how Coke has put several brands on the map. Talk a little bit about why this changed television advertising and even branded partnership as dramatically as it did.
Well, I should say it was Ad Age who said back in the day that it was a deal that had changed television advertising. So
can I just say, this time, embellishment aside, I will concede that you may not have been on the court or on the sand, but this really, I think this does stand to the accolade. And of course, we saw the pretenders. Every other reality show had Snapple and Pepsi and every other brand under the sun. But you know, I will cease to continue to boost your ego. And I think for people watching, it is interesting to understand what was unprecedented about this, and how it actually put not just a beverage, but actually the whole reality program, the whole business model for the most part, on the map.
Yeah, I mean, we can in fact perhaps draw a line. Maybe it won't be straight from this deal to, pardon me, Barbie, which in fact I little known. When I was at CAA, which is where the American Idol deal, creative artist agency, was done, I was on the team that first brought Barbie out to the studios, because Mattel was a client, and we can talk about that if you want to. So I started CAA marketing in May of 2000, and one of our premises was that, you know, inside of one of Hollywood's, you know, most powerful agencies, arguably the most powerful, certainly at the time, was unrivaled intelligence and insight into where audiences would be next and what will be capturing their attentions next. Inside of our music department, and so integration of our marketing practice, which represented brands, we defined ourselves as brand agents. Integration into the rest of the agency, music, film, television, talent, as it existed at the time, it was only that, was essential. And one of our music agents represented a guy named Simon Fuller, not to be confused with Simon Cowell. Simon Fuller, who had created and produced the Spice Girls, amongst other things, had this show in the UK called Pop Idol. And he'd been shopping it, I think, to CA Television, had been shopping it domestically, and had been rejected by everyone. But in the UK, their finale, and again, this is probably somewhere 2001 or 2, I suspect, 2000. I think that was it. It did an 84 share in the UK. And I was quite struck by that. And there's a famous line from Fox. I won't mention the Fox executive who said it when it was first taken to them, and they ultimately became the broadcaster, which is, music doesn't work on TV. And while he was right, of course, American Idol has never been a music show. It's been a soap opera that, you know, has music as its backdrop, just the way, you know, Friday Night Lights wasn't a football show. And we took it to our clients at Coke, pardon me, at the Coca-Cola company, and the CEO said yes to it on the spot. And key to saying yes to it, and Fox hadn't even committed to it at the time, was a negotiation. We worked hand in hand with their media partner, Coke's media partner at the time, that there needed to be more than just a media buy. There needed to be legitimate brand integration, not just product placement. And perhaps the irony or the curiosity is, at the time, we thought the single most important element of our integration was not what it's best known for, which are the Coca-Cola branded cups on the judge's desk. But it was a behind the scenes thing. We called it the red couch. We had actually stolen it, borrowed it from Coke Mexico. And it was a red couch, the back of which was in, you may know this phrase, the dynamic ribbon device, the swoosh on the Coke cans. It was shaped like that. I think it might have had the swoosh on it. And that couch was supposed to be emblematic of the simple premise that but for Coca-Cola, you wouldn't have access to this experience. And that was where behind the scenes interviews took place between Ryan and the contestants. And that was going to be the big idea. And we were then going to take the couch and port it into all kinds of places using the media platform of American Idol as a canvas for that. And it was a bet year one. Right. Did an 84 share in the US, in the UK, rather. We didn't know how it was going to work here, but that is, of course, history. And it was just, you know, bigger than anyone could have imagined. And it was a lot of fun, but it was really just leveraging other people's insights and getting them to our client in a timely manner. And a client that, in fact, had a tolerance, certainly at the time, for saying for risk, for a little bit of the unknown, which is something that seems too few have these days. It's
kind of fun to unpack, but also to sometimes retrofit, or as many people like to do, retrofit strategy. But if you look at it, one of the things was the softer sell. Instead of forcing it, call to action, promotion, etc., in someone's face, there was nuance.
Well, we did that too.
Yeah, well, you did that too. But it's almost like, it's kind of like, even when I think of Ford jumping on the brand wagon, you know, the video shot of the contestants in the cars it seems a little bit more forced. It doesn't seem as natural. I mean, there's a very eloquent, I think it's Shakespeare, who once said, "Once is witty, twice is shitty," and
Right.
and so there's definitely value in being first. And it's even funny, Seth, because the risk that was associated with being first dramatically almost became obliterated in terms of barrier to entry for Coke, but for barrier to entry for everyone else became astronomically high, and that is the price of being second.
Yeah, it is. It can be right, and it's always a trade off. And I think going back, your point is on point. And Ford was also very early into that, as was AT&T, who ultimately used it as a platform to introduce texting to the United States. But it speaks, and kind of with Barbie again in mind, product placement and so-called branded content and branded integration and brand storytelling. It's a very tricky task to do it well. If you do it without anyone noticing because you're so seamlessly integrated, well, then what good was that? Because they didn't notice. If you do it ham-handed and it just annoys, what good is that? And so finding that balance is essential. But even in 2001 or 2, whenever it was, we recognized, not that this was an insight owned by us, that it was better to be a part of something than apart from something, a part of as opposed to apart from, and that our clients needed to stop thinking that narrative interruption was the way to capture people's attention, influence their attitudes and behaviors, that leveraging what we did and what we knew about where attentions would be, that if we could make them a part of the context and the content, well, then there was something super powerful in that.
I absolutely love that. What an amazing soundbite. A part of versus apart from. Let's now move to what got my attention and how we came to start talking. Because it's all connected, right? When we think about business to, well, let's just talk about capitalism to marketing to the CMO, etc. But now let's go back to the highest order. And this was an article that you'd written called "Capitalism's Crisis of Perception." It just absolutely got my attention. And it's something that I wanted to talk to you about. In fact, what I'm going to do is actually pull up the article and have us move down. But why don't you set it up in terms of what your, I guess, high-level thoughts are, specifically around this hypothesis that capitalism needs to evolve. And even based on my soliloquy, something that I'm spending a lot of time on, not even calling it conscious capitalism, but community capitalism. I'd love to get your point of view at the highest order, and then we can go through some of the findings and some of the insights, maybe some surprising, maybe some less so, about what people actually think about whether this is just some crazy talk show host and managing director of a CMO network, I have to say.
Let's actually start with what people think. And in fact, let's start with, segmenting people into today's, the youngers, and what's become quite clear. And I have an anecdote from 3 years ago that kind of precipitated and drove some of this. But today's, call it 18 to 30-year-old, and it's really 16 to 35. But those generations, that cohort, to speak demographically, by and large, as the data shows, would trade capitalism for socialism, and finds the mere word toxic. And they find this, they're willing to make that trade, and they define it so toxically, arguably without a great deal of nuance and understanding about what capitalism is and where it stops and starts and where it gets conflated with other intersectional elements of our world, government, legislation, in particular, politics. So let me give you the analogy, or not the analogy, the story rather. It's sometime during the pandemic. I am, as you shared, head of cultural strategy and insights for Endeavors, the Ari Emanuel's company, cultural marketing agency, and we were on a Zoom call, as one did in those days, and apropos to nothing, this young strategist on my team who happened to be, I don't know, she was probably 26 or 27, a woman of color at the time. She's like, I fucking hate capitalism. I was like, I don't understand. You know, we're sitting here trying to figure out how to sell another plant-based hot dog. You work for a marketing agency. You're inside capitalism. You are an engine of capitalism. What's the disconnect? And she's like, oh, I didn't really think about it that way. And I think there are a lot of people who aren't really thinking about it that way. I think it's important to say a couple of things. When capitalism is just a framework, right? And oftentimes it's conflated with greed. There's no such thing as corporate greed. There's human greed from people who sit at the head of corporations. But Yvon Chouinard from Patagonia ran a company too. Excuse me. And so it gets conflated, pardon me, and misunderstood. It's just a framework. With that said, and I see up on the screen, you know, we talk about the challenge that we think we collectively face. Everybody in your audience, whether they're embracing capitalism or not, is a part of the system, for better or worse. And there's a bit of a irony between a generation or a cohort broadly that loves money but hates capitalism. Like, can't really have one and not the other. But it brings us back to, they misunderstand capitalism. Again, it's just a framework. That said, let's be absolutely clear. Like every framework, it is wildly imperfect. And over the last few years, its imperfections have been on vivid display, while its good has been less so. Inequity and mis and underrepresentation have been, you know, thrown in our faces over and over again. And for those who would be inclined historically to ignore them, you cannot. And so the article you put up, Capitalism's Crisis of Perception, was part one of a two-part series, and actually it'll continue from here, but reflects research we did in partnership with the Harris Poll that looks at Americans' attitudes towards capitalism, and it has a massive crisis of perception. Now, we could have stopped there at Forbes, but we didn't. Cognizant that we were once known as the capitalist tool, we are champions of capitalism. We are champions here of the free enterprise system. And we recognize that if the word is toxic, if the brand is toxic, people will not participate in fixing and evolving the product. And one of the eternal beauties of the free market capitalist system has been and is its ability to evolve, and it needs to, from here, to include more people, to continue to lift more people out of poverty. And so we put out an RFP. Oh, and I should say, forgive me, we think the consequences of inaction, super tactically, like hard to get people who hate capitalism to come work for agencies, to come be part of a market system, to come sell things, right? Which has, you know, at a macro impact, you know, real implications on GDP. Right. But it also has impact on who does get lifted out. And we think that in America today, the thought of becoming Venezuela, if we do nothing, is not as far-fetched as one might hope, and is certainly no more far-fetched than the thought of somebody, oh, I don't know, denying an election's outcome or climbing the walls of the Capitol to pee on Nancy Pelosi's desk. And so we decided that we needed to enlist whoever was willing to be enlisted to kind of create a bit of a narrative interruption on the current cultural conversation around capitalism, right? To get people, in particular the youngers, younger than me anyway, to kind of say, I didn't think about it that way. So we put out an RFP to Madison Avenue, and I think you might have referred to that story earlier. And four creative agencies participated, and we ultimately chose work by Goodby Silverstein and Partners that I think launches next week or the week after on Forbes. And it's not a Forbes branded campaign. We're like the ad council here. We're organizing and catalyzing, but this involves all of us. And the Goodby work which doesn't really isn't well reflected or represented by a verbal presentation, because it is a visual campaign, presents two sides of the coin. And one execution, if you imagine kind of a red side and a teal side, as the work is, the red side asks, offers millions live in poverty. Does capitalism suck.com? The teal side and side, says billions have escaped it. Does capitalism suck.com? So we recognize capitalism's imperfections and invite people to say, I didn't think about it that way. That's our hope for reaction amongst some in the audience. And of course, there's a continuum of toxicity and disbelief. Yeah, there you have it. Thank you. Which is, at the far end, you have what years ago might have been referred to as the Occupy Wall Street crowd. And at the near end, you have people like the strategist who used to work with me, which is critical thinkers who are, in fact, with new information or information presented differently, might be able to see their way into this conversation, because it's a conversation we have to have, because it will not get better. And it can continue to evolve, but evolution doesn't mean it gets better. It will not get better, evolve and get better, unless more of us participate in it. And I like your language of community capitalism, though we don't know that it needs another prefix, but implicit in community is consciousness, is caring, and capitalism needs
a big part of that is the idea of we is greater than me. A big part of that is take a small step back to take a giant leap forward. A big part of that is, and in fact, it's very much why I've brought it into and attached it to Web3. Why? Because shared values, shared ownership, shared reward, which is my definition for Web3, essentially is a conversation about purpose, diversity, equity, inclusion, and access, and loyalty. And when last I checked, those three priorities are pretty high, pretty far, up the list in terms of what marketers really care about. Which is why, if I had to dot one more time, is why I believe marketing can save the corporation that sucks, and in fact, even capitalism.
I could not possibly agree more. When I joined Endeavor, it was to actually start what at the time we called our branded impact practice. And I called it branded impact, hoping that would stick, but which it did not, because I don't think anything can drive change the way marketing can drive change, whether it's getting out the vote or getting people to stop smoking cigarettes or getting people to participate in capitalism's evolution, right? What is marketing but the capturing of attention and the influencing of attitudes and behaviors? And I think that I think we've lost sight of something in all of the conversations about purpose-driven marketing. I think you spoke to the way Michael Porter framed it, which is shared values. It was Porter, right? And I think that's exactly the right way to frame it. Purpose has become too confused with the philanthropic. And I wrote a piece at the end of last year, said the purpose of purpose is growth and profit. It is a means to an end. And we are capitalists. We just happen to live in a time when it's never mattered more to the decision to purchase something, going back to why I deleted Twitter, what businesses do, what brands and businesses do to make the world a better place. And the data in that Crisis of Perception article makes it quite clear, although there is data ad nauseum, that we, the people, continue to expect more and more from the businesses we do business from, and we will break up with them like we were in 7th grade if they do ill, and we will reward those who do well. Not every time, not every purchase, not every category, but more and more.
Well, we'll just put a little cherry on top. Step aside Michael Porter. The purpose of purpose is profit, and it's it's absolutely an interesting and I think very honest and transparent look at it, because so much of purpose, and I mean, I just get so frustrated at these marketer events when people start to about, we need to find and discover our purpose. And generally I'm the one, jumping up and down going, you don't need to discover your purpose. You just need to remember it, because you forgot it. Because if you never had it to start off with, you wouldn't have got to where you got to.
I think you're absolutely right. I'm agreeing with you more than I'm comfortable with. It doesn't usually happen.
We can change that if you like.
But I think it's, again, we confuse and conflate so many things. The purpose of the organization is also different than the expression of, it can be different, it isn't necessarily by default, than the expression of shared values, right? And more of our decisions are based on the presence of or absence of those shared values, because we don't look to government to make the world a better place. We don't trust government to make the world a better place. And amongst the other data points that's so interesting in what the Harris poll did is we do, of course, look to businesses to make the world a better place. And many of the same people who hate or are angry at and disappointed in capitalism support entrepreneurs, capitalists, support small businesses, capitalists, want to have their own business, capitalists. And it's just, the business of business is in fact business. And as I said before, the beautiful thing is that it's never been more aligned with doing good in the world, and recognizing that that's very subjective. Hobby Lobby has a very specific perspective on doing good in the world. Patagonia and so many others a different one. It's up to we the people to decide. And I feel that, and the data actually most interestingly shows from the Harris poll, that the number one actor that people see responsible for the evolution of capitalism to a better version of itself is in fact them. Is we the people. And I think that that's always been choice. Individual action and inaction has always been at the heart of a free market enterprise system, at the heart of business. And I think we just have lost sight so many times, so many of us, of humanity and people that are at the heart of what we do. Making profit is good. How we deploy profit and at what expense profit comes is the conversation.
I do like the fact that when we look at government, corporations, and individuals, it's not even subtle that what is required is a team effort, is the ability to join forces across the board, that it isn't necessarily us versus them. It is we, it is us, it is our. And I mean, how we get there is going to be a lot tougher. At the moment, I'm not sure who's trusted least, politicians or people that work in advertising. And we may as well just let's throw the lawyers and the used car salesmen involved as well. But
and the Hollywood agents, yes.
Let's throw them all in. But how do you think we regain trust? Whether we could jump and segue in the last 10 minutes or so and talk about the beleaguered CMO that, according to what we see, can't seem to keep their job, that has been forced out the boardroom, that has been marginalized. And I keep on, look,
that's false. That's a false narrative.
I know that's why I was kind of taking you down this thread. But at the end of the day, I just keep on going back. Let's go back to to Porter and in this case Drucker, that said a business only has two functions, which is marketing and innovation. Everything else is an expense. Well, that's great, but he's no longer alive to actually explain to us what he meant by that. Why the hell are we not actually practicing innovation and marketing as these two, kind of lost bastions of the sucky corporation?
Well, that is a much longer conversation than we have time for. But
did you just invite yourself back on the show?
Yeah, I think so. But it's the right question. I think in times of uncertainty, we are desperate for certainty. And when I talk about losing sight of humanity and people, it's not just our audience, it's our colleagues. While I think the CMO has the single hardest job in the C-suite because no job has changed more, number two is the chief executive. Right, in terms of change, theirs is arguably a little harder, but the CMO reports to the CEO. The CEO doesn't report to the CMO, and we are desperate for certainty. We are desperate for attribution. We are desperate to know that everything we do is going to work out. It's incredibly human. We're still very primitive, right, in terms of the architecture of our brains. Despite all these years on the planet, despite however sophisticated we think we are, we're still primed to survive. That's the first thing. That's why the status quo is such a formidable opponent in so many industries and so many parts of our lives, because it's comfortable. It didn't kill us. And if it didn't kill us, I'm going to keep doing it. And I think that has been why the status quo, why habit, why tradition, why what came before has been what has mitigated, in many cases, innovation, have mitigated taking risk. And the fact of the matter is a lot of people, especially in today's economy, and it's been this way for the last 3 years, are terrified of losing their jobs, which is an incredibly human response to macro events. And why the false narrative around CMO tenure, which we pointed out about a year ago, because it was contextless and didn't hold up to any scrutiny of its data, was so self-perpetuating. It gave people the permission to say, it didn't work right now. And, we keep judging too often. I shouldn't speak so broadly, but we often judge long-term strategies by short-term results. And what kind of sense does that make?
So let's talk about that. So are you saying clearly that it's not so much the numbers, but it's what's behind the numbers, or the numbers themselves are just not true, that tenure is shrinking, that CMOs can't seem to hold their job?
But the numbers were not true. The numbers lacked context. And in fact, if you look at the reporting that came out this year after we challenged the reporting last year, they provide context. And in fact, this year, it's made clear that a lot of these CMOs are leaving their jobs because they're going to another job. The implication was always they're getting fired, but they're either going to another CMO job, or they're getting promoted, and it's job switching, not tenure, right? It was positioned as failure, perhaps as self-serving for a search firm who was in the business of putting square pegs in square holes. Perhaps not, but it just lacked context. And, in fact, the data that we spoke to in reference was, only looked at the 100 largest US advertisers, which might have been global advertisers, actually, I don't know. But the 100 largest advertisers are not exactly illustrative of the broader marketplace. 4 of those companies, if I remember correctly, didn't even have CMO titles. And so they get zeroed out, and the zeros get factored into the data. So it was just wrong, and it's been righted, and we're very happy about that.
I will put a bow around that, and I will kind of, or maybe I'll put a pin instead of the bow, and I'll put a pin on what I think people don't realize is maybe the positive and the negative side of the argument. The positive, which I'm really, really glad to hear you say, and it will get people to thinking, because it is profound. I can't think of a function that has changed as much in the last. Remember, David Verklin once said the media business has changed more in the last 4 years than in the 40 years before it. Certainly, when we think about marketing, how many times that has turned and turned and turned again, even in the last 4. So I think that is a vital point. On the other side, just so that we don't let marketers off scot-free, there is the old saying, which are the rats are the first to flee off the sinking ship. And I do think that for those marketers that have persisted on the status quo, that have persisted in figuring out how to get to the stupid bowl or to Cannes or whatever the case may be, I think we need to see actually more tenure. We need to see more staying power. I've had, when you come back, Seth, we'll talk about why I believe that the future of marketing and advertising lies in actually a Hollywood model with respect to points on the package, royalties, residuals, and such. The agency that came up with those M&M characters should still be compensated every single day to this day, until such time that they've all been eaten by every celebrity on the Super Bowl.
I don't know if I agree with that, but I do know.
I had to get you to one point where you didn't agree with everything I said. Otherwise, what's the point?
As somebody who has client side and agency side experience, I'm not sure I agree with that. But I do know that I'm going to have to say goodbye to your audience and move on to the next thing. But I think you're absolutely right. The CMO who doesn't understand that her role is to drive growth, and unfortunately there are many of those, has absolute culpability and responsibility and shouldn't be in their job for terribly long, because what is your job if not to be an architect and engine of strategy and growth? But I think there are a lot of CEOs and CFOs who think they understand marketing simply because they've been marketed to and don't, who seek that absolute certainty when none exists. And I think we're at a real inflection point in terms of marketing's role in the world broadly, the CMO's role broadly, and I think marketing needs better marketing, in fact.
And better branding, as does capitalism. Under capitalism, man exploits man. Under communism, it's just the opposite. I just want to encourage everyone to go to Zazzle and buy the sticker that I just created. Love money, hate capitalism. I may as well make some money from it. Seth, I'm so glad that you were able to spend time with me today. You are so welcome. And also Chuck Norris approves of everything that you're doing and the direction you're taking this world in.
You are Chuck Norris approved.
And we will be back very
soon. I don't approve of Chuck, but we'll save that for round 2.
Just be careful. He might come after you. Bye-bye, everyone. See you.
Thank you for watching the show about hope, positivity, optimism, and if there's time left over, a little bit of marketing with your host, multiple author, and global keynote speaker, Joseph Jaffe. If you like the show, tell a friend or two. Please subscribe to the show. And if you want to get inside news, previews of upcoming guests, and much more, visit josephjaffe.com/subscribe to sign up for the show's newsletter.
And despite the best ministrations of your wife, you still look ugly.